Hi, everybody. Welcome to MiDAS seminar. I'm very happy today to have with us Yongjoo from UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So we will learn more about his research on exploratory AI. So he's been working, in addition to being a faculty in UIUC, he has also been currently chief scientist of Kibo, startup company that he co-founded soon after the graduation. With your advisor, right?
Yes,
and so he has held these two roles, which is pretty interesting and exciting, right? And he has also won a couple of awards, many awards, and specifically a pretty important one is being the honorable mention for the Jim Gray Dissertation Award, which is the top award for from our community, Sigmund community, for thesis quality. Okay, without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I wanted to visit universities and then give talks like this, but it was hard a couple years ago because there was a pandemic, of course. And then I had a baby 2 years ago, so very hard to travel. And then now she's 2 years old, and then so it's a good time. I thought a good time to ask my wife to solo parenting for a couple of days, so I can visit universities. So of course the BU has a strong presence in database community, but also I wanted to visit university like this because when I was a student at Michigan, I really appreciated one-on-one opportunities when faculty visit the group and then give talks. It was much easier to communicate with them compared to when I go to conferences, because it's hard to find them actually in conferences. So I really appreciate that. So I wanted to do something similar. So let me actually start with the research talk itself, starting from my overview of my research. So I have two pillars when it comes to my research. So pillar one is more applying machine learning or the AI techniques for database systems. I have a bunch of papers in the two main topics. One is approximate query processing, sampling-based approximate query processing. That was a major bulk of my PhD work, and then based on that, I and one of my co-advisors, Farzam Mujahari, started the company, and it's going pretty well. Also, I had some other papers about deep decimation or cardinality decimation, which is applying the ML techniques again for data systems. I've been pursuing some of the papers recently as well. But today, I'm going to talk more about a second pillar, building data management systems for AI applications. Now, one particular domain I've been pursuing is a checkpointing framework for exploratory AI. That's what I mean by managing. And then I managed to publish a couple of papers in this particular theme. So I'm going to share most of it in today's talk. Besides them, I've been also recently started working on some RAG and the vector database applications, and then it's more ongoing work. And then if I visit next year, then I'll have more stuff to talk about it. But today I'm going to focus more on the first topic. Okay. So a quick summary of today's topic, just a one-line summary, is bring checkpointing to the exploratory AI framework by developing some novel mechanisms. There'll be a one-line summary of today's talk. And when it comes to checkpointing, it's a well-known mechanism, widely appreciated in the database and the systems community already, and people are using it widely. And I'm trying to apply the same technique, basically the same technique, to a novel domain. And then we're going to see that in order to achieve that, there are some challenges, and then we had to develop some novel techniques to overcome that. So I'm going to talk mostly about technical contributions we had to make in order to make it possible. So let me start with the overall context before diving into what kind of problems there are. So we know that there are millions of people using exploratory AI systems. For example, here is one example. There are 1 million downloads almost every week. Google Colab is some systems probably you are using a lot when it comes to data science, and then they also have active millions of users. And not just a free software, there are some commercial solutions like Databricks, Snowflake, Mode Analytics. If you look at those companies, then they also have very similar looking offerings about data exploratory data analytics. And then in this talk, I'm going to mostly focus on one particular frame. Of course, the same technology can apply to other applications as well. But I'll just, for the sake of an example, I'm going to just use one particular example. The one problem is that if there's something like a kernel suspension happens, that's the problem one. If a kernel suspension happens, then I basically lose all of my intermediate work and then data, and I have to restart everything from scratch. This is one example from like a Google Colab. For example, like after like 15 minutes or like 30 minutes of inactivity, probably you've experienced it a lot as well. They just kill my kernel and then saying, oh, I killed your kernel and then you have to like, restart everything. I'm not gonna like be responsible. You start everything. It's on you. It's quite annoying. I feel like sometimes rerunning all the cells, for example, like containing those Python expressions can take like hours or days if you're like fine-tuning some machine learning models, for example. Also, sometimes I don't remember what I exactly did in the past, so I cannot just replicate the same result. Okay? So that's like problem one. Another closure-related problem is that I cannot simply move my session to another session. For example, I've been working on like a small data set. I want to like suddenly train like a machine learning model. Then I want to like turn on GPU and then move to a bigger machine. Then there's like a pop-up message saying that, oh, you're gonna lose all the information. Then like you have to start everything from scratch again. So that's like a not kind of expectation I had when I was a user. I wanted to just somehow magically move my workloads from one machine to another machine. If I understand how computers work, of course, we know that, oh, we cannot just move the arbitrary process from like one physical machine to another machine. That's like not how the computer is supposed to work. But from like a very high level perspective, I don't want that. I want to like somehow cloud services magically manage my services so that my workload just move from one machine to another machine without worrying about any details. And not surprisingly, if you search like a Stack Overflow, people actually ask the question like this: oh, like my session died. How can I like restore my sessions? Answer is no. Unfortunately, no. There was some lame answer quite like a while ago. Oh, if you have like some infinite loop, you can keep the session alive. That's like a one working solution that used to work, but currently Google Colab blocked it. So even if you have like an infinite loop, they just kill your session. And then we're going to see that one of the reasons why this happened is because those existing exploratory AI systems lack data management layer. So I'm going to talk more about what I mean by data management layer. That's like where my research comes in. And second problem, which is closely related to the problem one, is that we cannot revision some of the past states, even if something bad happened. For example, I initially imported a data frame, like some raw data, and then created a data frame. And then as I learned like a data science textbook, for example, I like started to do some feature engineering by dropping some columns, for example, or like filling in some null values. And then later I realized that, oh, I shouldn't have done that actually. So I somehow want to undrop those columns, but that's not possible. I cannot simply undrop a already dropped columns. That's not how the computers are supposed to work. Of course, if we had like a database, like a checkpointing mechanism, then we can load some of the past values and then restore my session. But this kind of like ability is not currently possible. And then there's like another Kai paper published a few years ago, not my paper, someone else's paper, discussing what are the existing fundamental limitations of using computation notebooks. And then we're going to see that many of the problems they mentioned are closely related to your inability to checkpoint the past states. For example, managing code, they cannot manage code because they just lose the past states. We can somehow address that. Archival, we cannot archive my code, but if we have a checkpointing mechanism, then of course we can archive those code base. Like there are like inability to share and collaborate or inability to reproduce. They're all related to this lack of a checkpointing mechanism inside the exploratory AI system. So then the question is, why don't you just apply some existing techniques like from like a database management and then apply that, somehow implant the technique into exploratory AI framework and then just make it possible? So that's not very straightforward once you understand how the like checkpointing works in the database systems. So how it works in the database systems is that database systems indicate the dirty data by using the centralized buffer manager. So for example, like when database engine or the transaction processing engine try to process some data, it loads a page inside the buffer pool, and then it marks like a dirtiness, usually some special bit. And then after a while, like a dirty checkpointing process that occasionally flush those dirty pages into like a data onto the disk system. And this is one example of a Postgres. There is like a VM dirty bit, which indicates like a certain page is dirty. So that's like a candidate for like a later future flushing operations. But enabling like a similar kind of mechanism inside the exploratory AI framework is near to impossible. So the reason is because there's no centralized buffer manager for the exploratory AI systems, and then we're going to see that enabling one is not straightforward. So fundamental reason why the centralized buffer manager is not a good idea is because they have their own way of managing their data. For example, pandas, NumPy, they all rely on the like C-based some like a special columnar layout, and then they manage their own libraries. PyArrow is like one example backend, and then also like a NumPy-like systems allow users to like manage their memory in their own way as well. So Python's kernel itself doesn't have a direct control about how those how those memory or the data are managed by those individual libraries. And some libraries like PyTorch has the ability to manage those tensors in the GPU side. If the information is stored in the GPU, then we cannot just, the OS cannot just access that. And then another example is array kind of like systems allow distributed data management. We cannot just, that's like this is one example of a library has their own mechanism of managing their data. So when it comes to given this existing libraries, there are like some optimized way of managing data. I think that like a centralized buffer pool is not a good idea. So we want to like develop a different mechanism to enable a checkpointing for the exploratory AI systems. So basic idea is that it's not a good idea to enforce those existing libraries to use the centralized buffer pool. Instead, we want to develop some intermediate layer that works as like a non-intrusive buffer manager that acts like a centralized buffer pool, okay, without enforcing those libraries to put their data into a central space. So what I mean by that? So what I mean by is that we have our own data layer, some like a non-intrusive data layer conceptually between existing systems like a Jupyter and the like underlying kernel, like a C Python interpreter basically. And we can think that this kernel is a container of some like a bunch of libraries like this. And then our intermediate data layer conceptually will look like this. It's going to look like a centralized buffer pool, but it's not going to actually manage the data in like a centralized space. And then using this non-intrusive data layer, if we can somehow develop such like a non-intrusive data layer, then we can enable like a lots of benefits that was not possible in like today's ecosystem. One obvious benefit is we don't have to worry about runtime disconnect because we can just manage like a data layer, and then save them somehow and then restore them later when needed. We don't have to worry about losing like past information because we are occasionally checkpointing those dirty data, and then we can again load them when needed. When it comes to fault tolerance, some machines may like unexpectedly go down due to like out of memory error, for example. And then again, we don't have to worry about it because we already checkpointed some data onto like a durable storage, and then if needed, we can restore them. So if we can somehow develop like a non-intrusive data manager for the exploratory AI framework, we believe we can solve many of the problems that the current exploratory AI systems are encountering. But the question is then, how can you like develop such a technique? Okay, like that's like a main topic of today's talk. So when it comes to like a non-developing non-intrusive data layer, we wanted to like build a correct system in such a way that if there are like some original state, then we want to persist those data into like some checkpoints and then want to restore that. And then the original state and the restore state should be exact match. And there should be like a low overhead. So checkpointing, why? Even when we are using checkpointing compared to like a regular system, it's like end-to-end latency should be almost the same, such that the users can just use a checkpointing-based system without perceiving any overhead. It should also support the most of the like, existing libraries as well. So these are some like desirable properties we've been like we had in mind when we were designing the system. I think we achieved most of the goals today. By like publishing a series of papers, DIM paper, and then some like a VLDB demo paper, another VLDB paper, and then Kai paper as well. Today's talk, I'm going to talk about part one, migrating one workload to another system, and then checkpointing, like intermediate checkpointing, like variables, 30 variables, and then some like a high-level user interface we developed on top of those existing checkpointing systems. So this is like three parts I'm going to talk about briefly. Do you have any questions? Let me pause briefly before going into part one then. Okay, no question. So let me dive into part one then. Part one, Elastic Notebook is mainly led by one of my PhD students, Billy Lee. And this is like a paper I'm going to talk about. It's called Elastic Notebook because we want to develop a system that can elastically migrate from one machine to another machine. Just to recap, one of the problems we are trying to solve here is that if a kernel suspends, then we just lose the state. We don't want that to happen. We want to somehow save the information in a way that saved information can be restored on an arbitrary machine in the future. The proposed approach is quite straightforward actually. There's some data, there's some state, and we want to save the state of the intermediate, like state of the kernel, into some the bits and bytes that can be stored inside the disk. And then once, if we want to restore the state in like some arbitrary machine in the future, then we want to load the state into the kernel back. Okay, so this is basically a mechanism we wanted to develop. If you're like familiar with some like how the computer systems work, then probably you know that like some of the existing possibilities. So I'll talk about them one by one and then point out some of the existing limitations. So of course, Of course, one of the most naive approach, like most people do when it comes to restoring the state, is just to rerun everything from scratch. Okay, that's like if you remember the exact history of the cell executions, for example, you can just rerun all and then restore everything. It's gonna take like hours or days. We don't know how long it's gonna take, but there's like one option at least. Of course, one like limitation is that we cannot exactly restore the exact state. There might be like some randomness as well. Another option is a data serialization based option. When it comes to data serialization, or data serialization itself means a process of storing the objects into some like series of bytes so that we can store the bytes into a disk, and then we can deserialize them later into live objects. These are like some possible options. There are very well-known ones. Pickle is a standard approach, and then Cloud Pickle, there are like some other libraries that extend the Pickle's capability for other like types of objects. This is one option. And then I'm going to talk about some like other options, such as OS-based mechanism, OS-based checkpointing mechanism. There's, for example, there's a library called CRIU, checkpointing and recovery in user space. That's like one of the existing approaches that are possible in the OS space, but that approach also has like some limitations. In the end, some of the solution we're gonna like present is some combination of a rerun everything and then serialization. So rerun everything has like, and serialization has like some limitations, and we're going to combine those incomplete approaches to achieve a better version that can achieve a better generality and the higher efficiency. Okay, so this is the approach we're pursuing. At a very high level, our approach is quite straightforward. It's because like a DAG-based restoration of a mechanism. So this is like a proposal. We want to combine the save, like a serialization-based approach, and then rerun everything basically. So for now, let's just assume that somehow we can capture this relationship or the dependency graph. So here's a cell 1. If you run a cell 1, it takes 3 minutes, for example, and then it produces a data frame. So circle means an operation, and then square or the rectangle means like some data or the variable. Okay? By running cell 1, we got some variable there. By running cell 2, we get another variable, df train and df test, for example. By running another cell, we get like a model. By running another cell, we get like a plot. So this dependency graph captures the dependence between the executions and the data variables. The question is, how can you build this dependency graph in the first place? I'm going to talk about that. But now I'm going to talk about once you build a dependency graph, then there's like some interesting optimizations we can do. The first option, one way to think about the first option, rerun all these there. We just pick this cell 1, cell 2, cell 3, cell 4 in order to restore the original state. And then according to this diagram, it takes 3, 1, 20, 10, and then in total 34 minutes. Okay, this is how long it's going to take in order to restore the original state. Another option, which is based on save all. If you save all those individual variables, df train, df test, model, and plot, then this is how long it's going to take according to this like hypothetical example. 20.6 minutes. Okay, but if we can combine those approaches, then we can achieve a lot higher efficiency. So by somehow like optimally combining them, for example, we rerun the cell 1 and 2, okay, and then we load the other variables. Okay, in that case, we can actually have like optimal like some combination 3, 1, 0.4, 0.2, and then 4.6 minutes. Of course, this is like you might think this is like some hypothetical example to stress my option 3, but we're gonna observe the same kind of optimization effect when we actually run the real world workload as well. So then let me talk about 2 problems. Step 1 is constructing the graph. Okay, constructing the graph is actually a bigger problem. because you are like all researchers in computer science, solving mathematical problems, solving too easy is sometimes easier compared to the actual engineering process. And then building the graph itself is like a lot higher, a lot like more challenging problem because of a unique way that the C Python interpreter is managing the object. So in the paper, step 2 is more important, but when it comes to real work, step 1 is more important, I'd say. So building graph, let me talk about that. So when it comes to building graph, we actually analyze the internal object structures. That's like a reason why it was like challenging. So in this case, I want to like capture the dependency such that a certain variable df test is retrieved by running a certain cell C2. Okay. How do you achieve that? So some of the approaches we tried in the past is like a code analysis, for example. By looking at the code, oh, your cell execution is accessing a certain variable, so there's a possibility of changing certain variable. But we didn't take the approach because when we tried it, there's a lot of false negatives. So actually variable changed, but the code, according to code analysis, we can actually capture that. This is one example. So we can say, let's say like a clean data is a one new variable. And then there's some like operations, like a drop, like a method call. And then it's hard to know that just based on the code analysis, whether this data or a data variable is changed or not. Okay. And then of course, if we know like semantics of every possible API and like somehow we hand annotate them, it might be possible, but in general, it's not possible. And then there's also a possibility that it's a data object, original object, and then another generated object is like some shared internal like object. So it's hard to know just based on the analyzing code. So let me try to tell you. So it's possible that variable is pointing to a certain object, data variable is pointing to another object, and because of a unique way that the objects are managed inside the Python interpreter, there might be like some other object shared by like 2 different variables. So we cannot just tell with the confidence that, oh, by accessing clean data, for example, there's a possibility that another variable changed silently. So we wanted to prevent those cases. In order to achieve that, the approach we pursue is actually like a more comprehensive and slightly more expensive approach. Here's another example of which is very hard to capture just based on the code analysis, but let me skip this slide. So the approach we actually built is something based on the variable graph. So we actually build a whole entire graph like about the object and the relationship to the variables. So let's look at this example. And then based on the code, for example, we build a whole graph structure in our system so that we can manage like interdependencies between like all the variables and objects like very precisely. So we can know that, oh, these tells you these bunch of variables. We grab like entire information using graph structure data. And then another variable is pointing to another internal object. And then there's like some dependency relationships. And then we can identify, oh, there's like some shared object, for example. And then by changing some like a shared object, we know that, oh, not only at least one is changed, but there's a possibility that the object is also changed. Okay? So we are building this entire graph. And there are actually, if you analyze like actual workflows, then there are like millions of objects, interesting. So something nice about this approach is that unlike just the more of a superficial code level analysis, we can actually capture like internal like structural level changes as well. So that's one example about how we can, I just talked about like step 1, how we can build the structure like this. And the second part is optimization part. So which cells we need to rerun, and then what variables we need to restore like back from like a disk. Yes.
So in the previous slide, it seems that you can store, for example, the addresses for every element of every list, for example.
Every element, not only every element, but also the other like some Python unique object as well.
I guess my question is, how fast this can be too much metadata?
Yes. It involves a lot of the overhead as well, and then we have some overhead analysis. And then according to our overhead analysis, the per cell or the per execution overhead is about like 0.1 second. So when a user run some like a bunch of cell, including like Python expressions, there will be like a 0.1 second overhead on average.
That makes sense. In terms of space,
In terms of space, in this work, space is less of a constraint because our focus is migrating from one machine to another machine. So there is no long-term space cost because we're going to temporarily create some a space and then temporarily create some bytes, move to another machine, and then restore them. However, in the part 2, when we actually checkpoint, there is some space constraint as well because we are going to store the entire history actually. And when it comes to checkpointing, we are using incremental approaches. We only capture the dirty data, not the entire object. For that reason, space was, I guess, relatively efficient, but we still need to actually store some variables, of course. We cannot just bypass, oh, I'm not going to store any pandas data frame, of course. Then we cannot restore, of course. So one decision I want to make here is that what cells we want to rerun in order to recover some of the variables, and then what variables we want to actually save to the disk and then restore them. Okay, and then of course one approach is try every possible combination. Of course, we know that it's NPR, it never works. Some of the technical contribution of our work in the paper is that there's a way to convert this into a well-known FT mean cut problem, and then we can solve the known solvers of a mean cut, and then get the optimal solution for this problem. So let me show you how the conversion works. So on the top right side, there's the original problem. What cells we need to rerun, what variable we want to store into a disk and then restore. This is a converted mean cut graph. So on the left side, let me go to next page. Next slide. On the left side, it's capturing the computation nodes, and then some associated cost for running these cells. Okay. And on the right side, there are variables and then associated costs with when it comes to storing those variables onto disk and then restoring them. And then by solving an ST mean cut problem, there's a source and target, we want to separate the source and target by creating a cut, and then we can figure out what's the optimal way. So let me start with the not good solution. For example, rerun all. Okay, we just cut everything here. Okay, that means that we are rerunning all the cells here, and this is the associated cost. Some of them, green ones are the green text is the associated cost. 31, 20, 34 minutes basically. This is another mean cut for not mean cut. This is another cut related to a save all. Okay, and this is not an optimal solution. This is one example of the optimal cut, mean cut, and then this is actually related to the optimal solution we were talking about in the previous example. 3.1 and 0.4 and 0.2. Okay, there is of course dual solution if we just flip the source and target, which is just the same solution as the previous one. Okay. So in summary, I just talked about the yes.
A quick question about the formulation. So are these weights infinite really in the middle or something?
This is infinite
same value.
Oh, these are actually infinite.
Infinite, okay.
Meaning that we never want to cut this.
Okay.
Because this means that if we run this and then it generates this model.
Right. So you always need to.
Yes.
Yes, that makes sense.
Exactly. So I just talked about the part 1, combine the rerun all and then save work in order to migrate one workload to another machine. So given the history, we can somehow construct this execution graph based on the bar graph method. And then we solve a mean cut problem and then figure out optimal configuration. Oh, we want to rerun this cell. We want to save some variables. And once we know the optimal solution, then we can execute the plan basically. So we ran some experiments. Can you correctly migrate the notebooks? Of course, correctness is the utmost criteria here. And then is the migration time efficient compared to saving everything and then restoring back? And then does migration incur a small storage overhead, which is related to one of your questions? And the short question is yes. Sure, because the paper is published. So we actually achieved 100% correct migration. One thing I wanted to add, something we mentioned in the paper, but easy to just miss, is that when it comes to rerun, in order to ensure 100% exact match, then we need to identify what's that? reproducible like operations or the deterministic operations basically. Some operations in like a machine learning or the random number generator, for example, may not be deterministic or non-deterministic. In those cases, we shouldn't actually rerun that if we want like exact recovery. So that's like one of the known limitations of the elastic notebook, because we need to like manually somehow annotate that what operations are deterministic. But in the part two, we actually resort to more like a incremental saving kind of approach. So we don't try to minimize the rerunning cases, so that we just always can deterministically reproduce the exact results. When it comes to this work, yes.
Could you reformulate the min-cut problem so that you?
We can do that once we know what operations are deterministic and what operations are non-deterministic. But the fundamental question is, it's a not scalable way to know that in advance. Maybe these days, because there's LLM, we can systematically analyze all possible APIs and then annotate them. I think it's possible, but when it comes to publishing this paper, we didn't extend that up to that point. And then when it comes to correctness, given that knowledge, we could reproduce the exact notebook state. And then some of the elastic notebook plus helix means some of the code analysis based methods, and then it couldn't reproduce the exact result because just based on the code analysis, there are sometimes false negatives. So even though there are some changes, the code analysis based mechanism cannot detect that there are actual changes. So of course, if we run all these 100% successful, that's for sure. And this is something interesting about dump session. Simply dumping, saving the variables into a disk space and restoring them. Interestingly, it doesn't always work. The reason is there's some particular versions of a Python variables that cannot be serialized. So current Python interpreter doesn't allow serializing those variables. But in our case, we know that it's not serializable, and then resort to a rerun based mechanism. Thus, we can recover 100%. So this is often fails because of a pickle error. And then this is ours, we could achieve 100% restoration. And the code analysis-based methods often failed. And this is how much our approach is efficient compared to rerun all. Rerun all is extremely slow, of course, depending on some workflows. And then compared to dump session, our approach is more efficient, because we can somehow nicely combine the pickling, serialization-based message, and then rerun-based mechanism. And this is about the storage cost. Storage cost at this stage, it's not a major concern actually, because we are more interested in migrating to a different machine. But we're gonna revisit the storage cost in the following in part 2. So in summary, notebook has a certain problems such as suspension, kernel suspension, and then we developed somehow conceptually we somehow store the state and restore in another machine. Okay, that's a goal of the elastic notebook. And then we developed our approach based on the this structural code analysis. We can build this graph and then solve some optimization problem to figure out what's the optimal plan. So this is part 1. And then we also work on incrementally checkpointing the notebook stage. So just to recap, some of the limitations I mentioned about is that we cannot just say once the operation is done, we cannot just undo the operation. That's one of the known limitations. And this is a known problem in the Kai work. So we want to develop some framework that enables the visioning some of the past stage. For example, our abstraction is a loop like this. Whatever's happened inside here, we can just abstract as operation 1. Okay. Now whatever's happening in the cell 2, we can just name that as operation 2. We don't really care what kind of expressions or the operations you are doing here. And then the third cell can be operations 2, 3. Now we can model that this is sort of a state transition from state 0, run the operation 1, and produce a state 1. Run operation 2, it produces states 2, and so on. And what we want to achieve is that we have some magical checkpointing system that can save the states one by one, save the states, and in the future, if needed, for example, I want to restore some of the state 1, then I can just quickly restore state 1, And then this is kind of like a goal we want to achieve and like a very level, high level abstraction. But there are like some challenges we need to overcome. So one challenge is something obvious is this saving and the load operation should involve a minimum amount of the overheads. And the second challenge is that it should involve a low storage cost because we are doing like a checkpointing an entire stage basically. Another challenge is that we want to develop a mechanism that can generalize to pretty much all known existing libraries, even if they have like some like custom ways of managing their memory space. And one of the fundamental challenges we need to address was how can you like calculate delta? Okay, so when it comes to serializing state 2, serializing state 1, we want to somehow identify the delta, and we also only want to store the delta in order to minimize like the storage cost. And of course, delta calculation should be accurate as well. And one of the limitations of existing OS-based mechanism called the checkpointing recovery in user space, or CRIO in short, is that they can only applicable to like a host memory-based process because that's their limit. So if there are like the way that they work is they just dump the like OS or host memories, processing memory into a disk, and then they just reload them. Now, one of the limitations is if the existing libraries are managing data in like a GPU, for example, which is extremely common these days. If you're using like a distributed framework, then the existing OS-based checkpointing mechanism simply doesn't work because they are not designed for that. And there's like some efficiency concerns as well. And this is how the like Python objects are created and managed internally. It's based on like a C definition, and then every single object is like some sort of like a linked list or like different objects. And then it's possible that this object is located here, different pages. This object is located here. Okay. In that case, if we change this list, then we need to like dump all the pages basically. So like dirty objects are like scattered across multiple pages, and then just dumping incrementally the updated pages are not very efficient. So if you can somehow isolate this data level and then just can dump that, that would be like much more efficient in terms of storage. So our approaches are very straightforward actually, and then it's easy and then worse. Some of the things you mentioned, but somehow interestingly it got published. Lucky. So say we load a variable with CSV and then create a data frame. So how it works is data frame, data, some like other metadata. There are like more bunch of variables. I'm just simplifying this. I have create another list there. I create another object here, for example. However, in this case, I'm sharing some like internal objects. Okay. In that case, I call the first variable as a co-variable 1, and then next two variable as a co-variable 2. And then we only checkpoint or identify the dirtiness of the object at the co-variable level so that we can preserve the interdependencies among those objects. Okay. And if we just store like a variable level, the interdependence might be broken. But if we store at the co-variable level, then it's fine. So if something changes within a co-variable, we just store the co-variable level. Of course, in the worst case scenario, if all the objects are like interconnected, then it can happen. But when we actually analyze like a real-world workflows, there are like quite many like co-variables, meaning that just by identifying the dirtiness based on the co-variable granularity, we can efficiently checkpoint the dirtiness, incrementally checkpoints. So if there are like some changes, then we store the entire co-variable number 2. And then when it comes to co-variable graph identification, it goes back to our variable graph. Because we already know how the variables and the internal objects interconnected each other, we can just rely on this variable graph analysis mechanism to construct this co-variable. And then, not surprisingly, there's some like online overlap because whenever a user executes a cell, bunch of Python expressions, and then we want to check on it, we are dynamically analyzing these co-variable variable structures and then construct a co-variable. And then depending on that, we decide which co-variable we need to checkpoint, incrementally checkpoint. Now, something I wanted to mention is that this co-variable based identification is a conservative. There is sometimes the case that like some variable are just falsely reporting that I have like some changed internal object. where like there are nothing changed. So even in those cases, we just conservatively saved.
So you say, like in this case, part of the checkpointing is saving the whole covariable.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so there's no delta between the previous version and the current version of the covariable. The delta is that I only focus on one covariable.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. And then there can be like a more efficient like approach if you can like somehow isolate this part inside the covariable. We are actually pursuing that as well. So we're gonna like submit in like a couple of months actually. And then covariable approach can systematically identify all types of changes actually. So where there's like if there's like a node modification in place update, we can identify that. There can be like different types of updates. Some links are like disappeared, and then there's like a new link. Then we can still like identify that. And then something like there's like just in place update to the edge information, then we can still identify that. So this variable graph-based structural understanding enables a very accurate identification of a covariable relationships, and then we can checkpoint the dirty objects. And then based on this covariable mechanism, we can easily implement the checkpoint mechanism. So let me go to like the step by step. So timestamp 1, I executed some code to load the data into a data frame. And then I can say, oh, data frame is created at T1, GMM, another object is created at T1, okay? I just record that into like a metadata store. There's a T2, I executed another code snippet. Oh, so I run like some GMM fit function, then GMM this model is updated now. So I just record it as a GMM is delta. So GMM is updated to T2. And something interesting is that because I only updated the GMM, I can say that, oh, DF is kind of inherited. There's no changes about the data frame itself. So we can incrementally construct this graph at every step, basically. Let me just continue. And it's possible that if you like go back and then like branch out, then we can still like preserve this like branching out operations as well. So in this case, I like roll back the executions, and then I branched out, and then I still like record this like git like graph basically. And this enables a fast checkout mechanism as well. Say I'm currently here at T5. I want to go back to like some arbitrary commit T3. And then we just compare the, oh, like what do I have? So let's see. I can see that, oh, these two objects, like a data frame, probably has like a large chunk of a data. It's a shared object, so I don't have to like do anything about them. I can just recover plot, because it's like timestamp T3 instead of T5. I can recover GMM, which is timestamp T2 instead of T4. So I can just switch those variables and then restore the original session, original kernel graph state, the T3. So mechanism itself is quite straightforward. So by using this, we can avoid the redundant operations. So just to recap, I just talked about like some high-level abstraction of a checkpointing mechanism. We treat the individual like cell operations, cell execution, then operation 1, 2, 3, and then we want to somehow load and save those states. In order to efficiently handle that, we built a like co-variable based identification.
So just to clarify, the timestamp is the same thing as the operation, essentially, right?
Yes, exactly. So only after the operation successfully complete, we record the state with the timestamp. If it's like a database setting, there might be like some concurrency interesting issues, but right now we don't have to worry about it because your Jupyter notebook itself is like a single user case. So there can be like some more other future directions we can pursue. If we move to like some like a concurrent distributed process.
I guess maybe Colab is multi-user, right?
Colab is not multi-user, so we need to. I think it's possible. I actually don't know. Yeah, that I actually don't know. Then based on this checkpoint graph, we can enable like efficient. So let me quickly go over the experiments because I have some other interesting slides after this. Basically, the answer is that we support like almost all existing libraries, and the checkpointing is efficient, and then we can check out is extremely fast as well. And co-variable was very much effective. something we spent a lot of time is to prove the coverage. So we pretty much tested quite a large class of widely known machine learning libraries. We gathered the 146 objects actually, and then tested everything. And then we showed that we can actually correctly store the state and then restore the state for all these objects. And these are some example libraries we used, which includes the TensorFlow, PyTorch, and other the actual libraries that people frequently use. So this is some effort we spent. And compared to other existing approaches, like a dump session, storing everything, and the elastic notebook is our own approach actually. Compared to them, incremental checkpointing was a lot more efficient. And then something interesting was there was some bump here, some jump here, and then I looked at the code, what happened. So it was a time that the PyTorch was downloading the model actually from internet. So we had to checkpoint that information. And there was some point that it was downloading some data as well. So we had to checkpoint that information as well. So it's something expected. And this is analyzing the amortized overhead. And then we, according to our experiment, it incurred about 0.1 second per cell basically. So at the user level, it's almost hard to distinguish whether there's a checkpointing mechanism or not. And the checkout itself is almost instant because we just identify the differences and then quickly roll back. So this is a summary of Kishu. Some existing limitation is that we cannot visit the past state. We developed our system. We developed our system based on core variable and checkpoint, and then it's working great. And part 3, I'm going to talk about some a UI framework we built on top of this checkpointing framework. So this is something called Kishu boards, okay? And then this is appearing in the Kai conference. One of my students is actually presenting in Japan in a couple of days. So this is a actual React application we built on top of this is a whole website. I just took some a screenshot inside it, and then you can actually download it as well. This is a Git-like graph showing the entire history of your interactions with the notebook system. And then if you click a certain commit, then it shows what state existed at that time. This is the notebook state, and then these are all the variables that exist at that time. And then we store the metadata about those variables to show some information. And we have built a search feature as well. The student was too excited, so she just built a search feature, but search feature itself is not the core contribution. So this is how it works. So we just run a cell, and then we're going to see how the history grows over time. Run a cell. I just ran another cell. Here's another commit message. Something interesting I want to point out is that there's 2 different types of state: variable state and then code state. We're going to see that they can sometimes diverge. I run another cell. There's another new history. Another cell. There's another commit. Another cell. Another commit. And then another cell. I got the 85 accuracy. And then there's another history. So it's just in real time, as soon as you execute something on Jupyter, it's just connected and then dynamically loading the information in the React, which is building the graph. Say I want to try a different model. Oh, maybe my feature engineering here, I shouldn't have dropped the age column, for example. I want to undrop my age column, for example. And then what I can do is I click this point and then click rollback execution. Okay, because I'm rolling back the execution up until this point, all the numbers will disappear actually. So everything disappeared, all the numbers disappeared, indicating that my latest execution is number 2 here, okay, which makes sense. Something interesting, another thing is that because I roll back only the variable states, the code state and variable state diverged. Code state is still showing that, oh, I have all those checkpoint information, but only the variable state roll back. Say I just arbitrarily edit one of the existing cell, run it again, and then here's number 3 because I just reran it with a different expression. And then there's some new checkpoint here, number 6 actually appearing here. Is that correct? I think so. Wow. No, actually this is the head state and the variable state. Oh, I was confused because of number 3. Number 3 just means a commit message that includes what was a run at that time. And then this is the latest information. And then this is line indicates that this is coming from like the original number 2 here. And I just run again and again, and then you can see that like more and more commits are added, just like usual. Number 5, and then I run another thing, and then interestingly, I undrop the one column, then the accuracy is lower actually unexpectedly, which is bad. So what I'm thinking is, I want to actually go back in time. Okay, I want to go back in time here somewhere. I want to somehow restore my original model. Okay, and then I can do that by clicking, say, check out both variable and code. Okay, by clicking this state, my original model. And then if I do that, then it just changes everything and then go back in time to 0.85. Okay, and then everything is controllable in the UI space. And then we tested if this mechanism, UI mechanism, can actually lead to improve the productivity. So the way to read this graph is this is a control group. This is our Kishu group. This is control group. This is a Kishu group. The difference between the left set graph and the right set graph is this is compute intensive task, and this is a lightweight task. Okay, and then if you see that when it comes to compute intensive task, the lower bar is the better. So there was a significant improvement from by using Kishu. But when it comes to lightweight workloads, there wasn't that much improvement when the people used Kishu. I think the reason is because the workload is still lightweight, and then the session was pretty short, like less than 1 hour. And those grad students who participated in the study already remembered what exact sequence of operation they did in the past. And then if they want to go back and revisit and then change some some variables, and then they can they memorize everything and then just do it quickly. So when it comes to lightweight workloads, there wasn't much significant gain we are offering. When it comes to compute intensive tasks, when it comes to even if they remember everything, they anyway need to execute the cells and then wait. In that case, Kishu's checkpointing mechanism can help with a lot of efficiency, operate a lot of efficiency gains. And when we ask, are you willing to use the system like this? And then most of the people said yes. And then we had another set of a question that asked, are you willing to pay some money if this is part of become Google Colab Plus, for example? And then many people say, they're willing to pay $5 or $10 additionally for using this feature. And another thing we did on top of this is not only human subject, we applied the Kishu for AI agents as well. So we use the AI agents to dynamically explore the data sets by dynamically generating the code. So we gave this a prompt, and then we said, kind of generate the steps, steps you want to explore a certain data set. This is some example. So this is its actual code is a lot more complicated than this. But the AI agent ChatGPT generates a bunch of steps, and then we ask the ChatGPT to randomly jump back and then explore different paths. And then we repeat this multiple times, generate thousands of different code snippets. We compared a few methods. One method is just naively restarting from a root level and then taking different paths. Naive continue is we just take a path and then we don't restart everything. We just naively just execute additional cells. Some expectation is that because we are running some additional cells, there might be some potential unexpected conflicts. Kishu board is our checkpointing based mechanism. So we compare the some end-to-end latencies, and this is the result. Naive restart was relatively slow compared to Kishu board because it's re-executing everything from start. Something interesting about naive continue is that it was fast because it's just ignoring all the past and then just continuing executing whatever cells that are generated by ChatGPT. But the problem is that sometimes because it doesn't manage a variable relationships correctly, there are a lot of incorrectness compared to a naive restart, for example. So naive continue is not the approach people should take, although it seems to be faster. It's incorrect simply. So this is a summary of the work. So we, when it comes to managing, developing the non-intrusive data manager, we had these 3 goals: correctness, efficiency, and generality. We produced quite a few papers, and I just talked about migrating a notebook state from a machine to another machine, and incrementally checkpointing notebook state over time. And then we can build a new user interface on top of these checkpointing frameworks. And the whole thing is based on database research, of course. Something very exciting is that we are presenting at PyCon. This year's PyCon as well. So one of my PhD students, Billy, is presenting at PyCon. World's first undoable notebook, which I think is true. So I just talked about bringing checkpointing ability to Exploratory AI framework by developing some novel mechanisms. This I think is just the phase 1 though. We're thinking about phase 2 as well. So say there's a user who are executing some code snippet, and then they just submit the code to the central server, just like we are using database systems. This is like query, that's like a database server. And then initially we know that, oh, this is kind of like some like a quick code we can run. Then the database server just uses a CPU on the instance, for example. And then you can determine, you can restore the state based on checkpointing mechanism again and again, by the way. After running this query or like some Python expression, we can store the result, store the state. And the user submits another query. Say this involves a lot of fine tuning, for example, model fine tuning, and the system can quickly detect that, oh, we need a like H100 NVIDIA instance. And then after that, we save the result. Okay. So by doing so, we can enable like instance scaling. We can per cell execution, we can choose a different instance basically. Okay. And then it's a lot more cost efficient because we don't have to maintain the active servers while users are not interacting with the notebook system. We can just turn off the suspend machine and then serve other queries. So this is like how I view the like data like how I view the like, Kishu is contributing to the trend in like database research. So like decades ago, everything started with the Postgres, MySQL. All the servers are running in a local environment, and then UV observed the like, cloud data management trend emergence. And then one of like some interesting database companies, like Snowflake database or the BigQuery, they're running everything in the cloud. And then the way that works is that when we submit a query, they quickly start the machine, execute the query, and then suspend the machine. It's a very elastic environment. Another interesting development we've been observing is some like more advanced kind of like mechanisms, AI analytics, beyond the SQL-based aggregations. And then I think kind of like framework we're developing is merging these two trends, elastic computing and then advanced the application into one point. So this is like my summary of my research. So and then I'm like working on some like RAG and vector DB related work as well. And then if I have like a more interesting development, then I can visit in like 1 or 2 years and then share more about it. So it's exactly 1 hour. Thank you so much. And then let me know if you have any questions.
Let's take our speaker.
Great talk. So as an avid user of Jupyter Notebooks, I appreciate like this type of work. So I'm curious about like the types of notebooks that you guys were testing on. Essentially, did you guys generate notebooks like yourself, or did you like use like
we download the Kaggle notebooks basically? Most of them are from Kaggle, and then some of the reviewers point out, oh, Kaggle notebooks are like already clean notebooks. So we downloaded some like a GitHub, like some 30 notebooks or like some tutorial notebooks as well. But we didn't generate anything by ourselves. We just downloaded existing notebooks.
Gotcha. So as an extension of that, I think you alluded to it just earlier as well. So I wanted to ask how you deal with like linearizability in notebooks, because I think like all of us here in this room are programmers, so we know to like try to make our code a little bit clean and like linearizable. But I think like the notebook use case is for like data scientists, and a lot of them might like end up, for example, rerunning like the same cell multiple times as essentially functions, right? So I don't know if you guys ran into issues ever trying to like build dependency graphs in those use cases or not, and how did you do it?
When it comes to linearizability, the history itself is fully captured inside like a database itself. But I think there is still some discrepancy between what the user sees and then what is stored in the like database system.
Right.
So database system currently captures the entire like whatever complex graph is possible, but we don't have a very good UI that shows the information in like a Jupyter space, for example. So we're still like thinking about it, but we don't have a very good solution about what's a very good way to show like a complex information in like a linearizable manner.
Gotcha. And then did you ever end up having to deal with like issues creating the DAG though, from like essentially notebooks where like multiple cells are being run like multiple times in like different scenarios?
Multiple cells running wasn't a big problem because in the end it's like a run one by one.
Okay, yeah.
It's on the line scheduler. But the bigger problem was there's like certain types of Python variables that are not serialized or not storable. So one example is a Python generator. or like Python, like when we are working, like for example, or another example is like when we are like working a Python function, we want to need to like store the like what's that like the tag basically, function call tag, and then that information is not serializable. So we're like thinking about how to support that current mechanism is resorting back to like a rerun based mechanism, but there's like some potential limitation in there. Another thing, I think they are the major. Oh, another thing was like incorrectly implemented library. They say they can deserialize later, but their implementation is not very good. So they say, oh, they just error out. Right. And then we just observe that and then resort back to like a rerun based recovery for those libraries.
Makes sense.